Hello and welcome to Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff. I'm Garth Neufeld along with Eric Landrum, your podcast hosts. As the name implies, we center on conversations about teaching, but we often veer into other interesting topics, which is the end stuff. This is episode number 85, where Eric had the opportunity to interview Kathy Becker-Blease from Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. But before we get to that, Psych Sessions is now supported by the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, that's STP, which is APA Division II, also known as our teaching tribe. I want to quickly mention some upcoming dates and deadlines for you to be familiar with. If you mentor undergraduates in research, you might be interested in a new STP resource, Improving Undergraduate Research. You can check out the website to find this fabulous resource that will help you optimize student experiences in the research process. Please visit teachpsych.org for more information. Also, STP is inviting nominations for the Mentorship of Teachers Awards. This award recognizes various forms of mentoring of teachers, including sharing knowledge and expertise, providing support and encouragement, offering feedback on performance, helping to identify opportunities and resources, and serving as a professional role model. That deadline for application is February 15th. And finally, STP is seeking 2 associate internet editors to assist the internet editor in overseeing various STP internet sites to help disseminate STP's resources and improve the user experience. For more information, check out the Get Involved link on STP's homepage, teachpsych.org. Eric and I want to encourage you personally to become STP members. This is our tribe, and the great resources and all these awards and opportunities are available to you for only $25 a year. So thanks to STP. We also want to invite you to get involved with a new segment on Psych Sessions called Ask Psych Sessions, releasing every bi-weekly Tuesday on the off week of our full episode releases. Marianne Lloyd from Seton Hall University is going to head up this side project, and we are going to ask some of the best teachers your questions. So please feel free to send your questions to us, and we will find someone to answer them. You can head to bit.ly/Ask Psych Sessions to post your questions. That's bit.ly/Ask Psych Sessions, all one word, all lowercase, and we will be sure to give you credit on air for your fabulous questions. Finally, if you haven't had a chance to rate Psych Sessions on iTunes, we invite you to go leave a rating there, as it helps us pop as people are searching for psychology-related podcasts and teaching-related podcasts. So thanks for doing that. Now, before you hear the interview with Kathy Becker-Blease, please allow me to share some listening tips and some of my favorite moments. I have slowly gotten to know Kathy over the last couple years. I have a friendship with Rachel Soicher at Oregon State University, as well as Regan Gurung. And so I have met Kathy a handful of times, and those have all been really wonderful. And when you don't know somebody, but every single thing that you hear about them is positive, that is pretty special. And so, Kathy, I hope you're listening to this right now. Your reputation does precede you in the best possible way. And so you don't disappoint. It has been a pleasure to get to know you over these last couple years. Eric and Kathy know each other pretty well. Eric was out there on behalf of STP to do a program review or department review for Oregon State University, and they worked pretty closely on that. So that's kind of the backstory. I don't know how long they've known each other outside of that, but it sounded like maybe that was where their relationship started, and it has been really fun for the two of them to talk together about some side projects and to work on some things. I really also like the way that Eric really gave Kathy kudos for all the things that she's been involved in, including what they referred to as the West Coast Clark workshop for high school teachers that they hosted for the first time. I believe it was last summer in 2019. And I do believe, without Kathy saying yes to that, that doesn't happen. So really, really cool. I'm jumping to the end of the episode, but Eric and Kathy have this conversation just about meaningful work, about taking chances, and the way that Kathy makes those decisions, or the way she compares important work decisions to important life issues, is really sobering, I thought, for me, to think about. How important is... we all agree, I think, and we love our discipline, and we love what we do, and we love teaching and research and all those kinds of things, and we obviously find it valuable, meaningful. And then there is another layer, and that layer is relational, and it is family, and it is justice, and it is protecting the rights of others, and she really draws the line for us in this episode, and I really appreciated that conversation. Kathy gives us some really interesting insight into faculty perceptions of teaching, and Eric and Kathy have this great conversation. Part of the reason I really loved listening to this is that I don't get this this large departmental view from anywhere else. I'm at a community college, and so here's somebody at a massive 4-year university with a huge psychology program, and she's seen some things, and so she and Eric get to talk about what faculty think about in terms of teaching, and their perceptions of that, and maybe some ways to solve some challenges around that. Kathy gets into her backstory. She comes from a family of origin who doesn't necessarily hold college in high esteem, who might actually be actively opposed to college. You'll have to listen for that because that's fascinating. We get an overview of her undergraduate work, and she does change colleges, universities, at least once during that time. And she ends up getting all of her degrees at the same institution. And so she and Eric have this interesting conversation about whether there is actually a deficit in getting all of your degrees, or 2 out of your 3 degrees, or whatever it is, at the same institution. I know that I've had this conversation with people. Many people assume that maybe it's not good. They dive into it and talk about whether that is true or not. I want Kathy Becker-Blease as my chair. I just want to put that out there publicly. She is such a supporter of her faculty and of ideas that come around. I've already talked about that, but in my notes I just said I want to be I want to be in her department. So I just really enjoyed that. And if you are stepping into an administrative role as a department head or a department chair or something like that, you may want to listen to the way Kathy approaches it to have a real good shot at success. And I think I'm going to guess that Kathy makes friends. Now, you always have to make some tough decisions, I think, when you're in that position. But again, the way that she approaches things and thinks through things, we get an insight into how she problem solves things. Kathy loves spreadsheets, which is crazy to me, but she likes solving problems. She likes scheduling, administration, and she's really good at it, apparently. Kathy talks about getting into the workforce for the first time, applying for jobs, doing the adjunct thing, and then the frustrations of applying in a pre-internet era where you apply by mail and things were lost and phone calls didn't get made and whatever else happened during those times. Eventually, Kathy finds herself knocking on the door of a dean and asking in person for a job, and I'll let her tell you how that ended. You are really going to enjoy a chat between 2 seasoned veterans and 2 wonderful people. So now, please enjoy this interview between Eric and Kathy Becker-Blease.
I'm with Kathy Becker-Blease from Oregon State University. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
So thank you for being here. I also, before we get into this, I want to thank Jordan Troisi at STP, and we're at the annual conference on teaching, and it's always a pleasure to have space. And so I want to thank those folks up front. I want to thank Kathy for taking time out of day 1 of the conference to step away and chat with Psych Sessions. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you're being very prim and proper, and so I can go get some bourbon if we need to, and have a midday chaser. Oh yeah, you've got the flask there. We say it's water. We never really know with any of our guests. So you were in the room this morning for the opening address by the president of STP.
I was.
And he did a really interesting thing. Part of his address was to celebrate mentors and mentoring.
Right.
And he invited people previously and in the audience to come up and talk for up to 3 minutes about mentoring experiences. And I didn't know this was going to happen. Well, I knew the event was going to happen. I didn't know the cast of speakers until I got into the room.
Nor did I.
Oh, really?
No, I did not.
You didn't. And so the very first speaker that got up was your very own graduate student, Rachel Soicher from Oregon State.
Yes, my first and only PhD student.
First and only. So when did the PhD program start at Oregon State?
We're going into the 4th year, and Rachel was part of that first class, so she's starting her 4th year.
Okay, so what was that like to be sitting there and hearing that?
Oh, well, Rachel has totally spoiled me as being the best graduate student ever. And so part of what was going through my head was how will I ever admit another graduate student ever again? No, Rachel and I work together really closely, and she's an older than average graduate student and has had graduate experience before. And so her sort of wisdom about that she shared about how difficult it is to do teaching in an R1. These are some of the things that she talked about. It was really nice to hear that she recognized those things, because they're not things the average graduate student would, or even faculty member would observe.
Yeah. I it was very poignant, and she choked up, which of course made me in the audience choke up, when someone chokes up like that. But I think it's really pretty rare for someone to recognize it, especially when they're in the midst of it.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think I realized it when I was in the midst of it. Did you?
So it's funny, here in Denver, I'm staying with a student that I went to grad school with who was a couple years ahead of me in my program. And we had a really special time in our research lab with our advisor, and we did realize it at the time. In fact, our advisor referred to that period of time as Camelot.
Wow.
And so I always had a very close relationship with my cohort and my advisor, and thought many of the same things Rachel was saying. So learned a lot by observing implicitly things that my advisor did on behalf of myself and graduate students. And so part of what I was thinking was that, the gratitude on up from the generations before, and how funny that is, that passes down without, it wasn't explicit.
But it sounds like it's gratitude plus, or it's a yes and. It's gratitude plus it influenced how you mentor now.
Right. Yes. So it seemed quite normative to me, because I thought it was normal that you would care about your graduate students, do these things. And I now know that's not always the case in higher education. But just as Rachel said, you kind of pick it up implicitly, and you just kind of through modeling or whatever. And I was reflecting back on experiences I had as a graduate student that, in which I had said, "Oh yeah, I remember my advisor did things like that."
So why is it so hard to do that for graduate level students? And I know you and Missy Beers at that other OSU.
The other, yeah.
Are passionate advocates for graduate students and the value of teacher training and grad students becoming good teachers of psychology. Why is it so difficult for some of your colleagues to realize the importance of that skill for your future students to be on the job market and be successful? What do you think?
Well, partially I think it's because I was on research fellowships in graduate school, and I did a postdoc, and I did all research, very little teaching in graduate school. And then because my partner was also in academia and so forth, so the first job I got after that postdoc was a half-time instructor position. And it just was the job. And then it got downgraded to an adjunct job, which meant the same gig, but half the pay. And so, and then moved on to become a full-time instructor elsewhere. And then the chair converted that line from a full-time instructor line to a tenure track line. And initially it was 75% teaching, which is a high teaching load as a research-intensive institution. And so part of it is that I'm well aware that that is very helpful to have teaching as a skill. I certainly would have benefited from having some skill in addition to willingness to teach early on, and also realized through that experience that many of the things I love about research are also possible through teaching. So the sort of problem solving and creativity, and investigating things, you can use the same part of your brain while teaching. And so to me, like, it became very clear that you can go back and forth. And also it's not, many of my colleagues want to set students up to do what they want to do, and students still come in saying, I want to be a researcher. And they think they're being supportive by then, limiting their teaching and helping them do more research, not really realizing that these skills could be something that would help them. So, most of my colleagues have not ever had that experience. So their only experience is the less teaching I do, the more productive I am. Like, that's what they perceive. And they want to pass that on to their students. Why not? Why wouldn't you?
But in your department at Oregon State, your R1 colleagues, when they were hired as assistant professors on the tenure track, didn't they all have to show teaching, research, and service to gain promotion and tenure? Wasn't teaching part of their responsibility? So even though they see themselves as scholars and researchers, world-class scholars and researchers in their specialty fields, they had to have a teaching skill to earn that full-time tenured position.
Yeah. So this is interesting, and I think it goes back to something you and I've never talked about, which is DBER, the discipline-based, education.
Oh, yeah. I know of it.
And and it's a kind of a version of SOTL, and if you read some of that work, it has an interesting flavor, which is the idea that you become an excellent teacher by sharing your research with your students. And I think that's what they imagine. So the better researcher I am, the more I know about the topic, because from a certain worldview, the more content knowledge you have, then the better you are to share that, with your students. And so I think they think of it that way. I will become an expert, and then I will share my expert knowledge with my students. And that's a model. And interestingly, it's a model that we usually think of as being supportive of teaching. But in some ways, it undermines gaining skills in teaching and learning in a way.
Yeah.
Or it can.
Right. If you're believing that, then but there's no, as you just described it, there's no room in that model for practicing the skill of teaching.
It's very much I have it in my brain, and I will, learn. I might learn to make better slides or lecture, become more coherent in my lecture.
The data from study 3. Oh, I shouldn't do a bar graph. I will do a pie chart when I present it in class.
Yeah.
In that really nice theater in the round that I have access to,
right.
with the 360 audience.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's what they think, and they get excited about research, and then they share their enthusiasm with the students. And that's what the students that they hear from the most tell them they love about their teaching. And they only hear from a subset of their students, and the students they hear from say, I thought that was fascinating. Study 3 was fascinating. Can I be in your lab? And so it's reinforcing. And so that's what I think they think teaching is mostly.
Do you think it's, I love research. Let's do 100% research because I love it, and it's just teaching. There's no time for teaching, or it's I love research, but I also kind of don't like teaching. Is it teaching is is there, I'm not asking you to talk about specific faculty, or maybe not even
Yeah.
OSU faculty. Is it anti-teaching, or is it teaching? Is it indifference to teaching?
So they would say, most of the people I know in this category would say that I love teaching. My favorite kind of teaching is mentoring my students in my lab, my graduate students in my lab. Secondarily, I really love spending a lot of time on my honors, undergraduate students' theses. And boy, do I ever spend a lot of time editing their honors theses. And that might then extend to a senior seminar or something like that. And it's just that it's within that universe they focus their activity and are successful largely with that population in that group. And that's the universe. And they'll generally say that's where I'm most efficacious and that's where I'm most skillful and I do a good job. And my students win awards and they present their research and we do. That's great. And that's kind of the boundaries within they are thinking about.
Well, and I have I kind of a term that I use at Boise State for that. It doesn't fit perfectly, but it's a very small boutique type of. It's a small batch. I mean, those instructors it's a one-off honors students, a senior undergraduate senior thesis, a small section of highly advanced students. Well, yeah, they would be a pleasure to work with. Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to how some people would see it, which is I look for students who have this talent, and then I go out of my way to nurture that talent, and that is my value add to the institution.
Right. Or maybe I look for the large class sections where I can present psychology to people who have never heard of it from a scientific viewpoint, and I can counter all of the misperceptions, and I get to turn people on to this science that they've never heard. It'd be nice to have more people like that around, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, I feel kind of sorry for these people because they, when I figured out if I'm teaching 400 students, that just by the policies in the class or just the relationship you can have even in a large class, that it doesn't have to be one-off. And I thought, when you start to realize, wow, I could affect so many more people, that to me is like that same kind of drug. You're like, wow, I can, make a difference in so many more lives. Love to make a difference in one or two people's lives. That's great. Still will do that.
Right.
But it can be life-changing just to treat people well in a large lecture class.
Right.
And that experience, I don't think many people have really had. And I may only have it because I was teaching full time, 4 classes a quarter for years. So I had enough time to kind of figure out how to do it, and because maybe if you're only teaching it once a year and you hate it, maybe you never really get to that point.
So were you teaching a 444 at Oregon State?
Right.
And was that as a full-time tenure track faculty member?
As an instructor. As an instructor, I was teaching 4.
So would you mind telling the listeners about your trajectory at Oregon State that leads you now to, let me see if I can get this right, department head or department chair?
It's called the school director.
Oh my! I was going to get school right.
Yeah.
The School of Psychological Sciences. Is it plural or singular?
Singular.
Oh, geez.
Okay.
Okay. The School of Psychological Science director.
Right. Okay.
Which essentially is the chair of the department.
That's right.
In parlance that we
That's right.
use in the other parts of the world.
That's right.
But from your arrival at Oregon State.
So I arrived at Oregon State, and just for the early career people, I'll mention that my husband and I each applied, I believe, 3 times to this job. They one time lost one of these 6 applications.
Oh my gosh.
This was the old days where we mailed things.
Is this, I'm sorry, first job out of grad school?
This was after my postdoc.
Okay.
So Yeah. So another time I got to the point of campus interviews, and then there was a budget cut, and they like lost the line. So and then eventually I literally had moved to town and showed up in the chair's office and said, "Well, I know I've applied 3 times and you haven't hired me, but I'm here. Can I have a job?" And he said, "Oh, I desperately need someone. Sure." And he hired me to become a full-time instructor.
Okay,
Right
so I'm sorry. I have to. Have we had this conversation before?
No, I haven't.
So for the listeners, as it is with almost all of the guests, Kathy and I know each other. We've spent a little bit of time together, but I don't know all the backstories, which is the fun of this podcast. We get to spend time together. So obviously, you wanted to work at Oregon State pretty badly.
So we had my partner and I had identified Oregon State as a place where we could both have tenure track jobs and be happy.
But were there any other schools that you were also on the third? I mean, you weren't on your third application at Boise State University.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it had to do with, so I'll just go into a little bit because there are people in this position. So a lot of our moves, so we had moved from Eugene, Oregon, where we graduated from the University of Oregon. We then moved to New Hampshire. We moved to New Hampshire. I may have applied for a couple jobs, but essentially they had the perfect postdoc open there, and they had an assistant professor position for him. And so we end up there. And interestingly, none of these were spousal hires. I'll just say as a different thing, there were no accommodations. We just looked at a map. We looked at job ads as they came out. Mm-hmm. Whenever we had the opportunity to find a location where we could both have tenure track jobs in the same place, we applied to that place. So that those places were essentially the University of New Hampshire, Washington State University, Vancouver, and Oregon State University.
Okay, and I want to put a pin in the term spousal hires. I want to come back to that when we're done. When you're done with your story, and the postdoc was in what field?
So I was trained as a developmental psychologist, and I had to work on child trauma and child maltreatment from a psychology point of view. The postdoc was at the Crimes Against Children Research Center at University of New Hampshire. The work there is primarily led by PIs who have degrees in sociology and more criminology. So that was really interesting. And so I was doing work on prevalence of crimes against kids.
That's intense stuff.
Yeah.
And did you? So what prompted the interest in Oregon State from New Hampshire?
New Hampshire turned out to not be a good fit for John and me. So the postdoc ends, and I, found another job for a while. But essentially, the bottom line is there were no 2 tenure track jobs there at the same time.
Sure.
So a tenure track job becomes available for my partner at Washington State University in Vancouver. Wasn't clear that there was a tenure track job there, but it was. At least there was some possibility. And so we went there, and I worked there as the instructor. And kind of the similar thing at Oregon State. A tenure track job was not becoming available, like I said, kind of the opposite at WSU Vancouver because of the budget. This was in the recession, 2008. I mean, nobody was hiring. And so when this position became available for my partner at Oregon State University, we left again, hoping, even though they had rejected us now multiple times, the hope was still, well, maybe this will work out. And I don't know if this ever would have ended. Like, we might have just spent our entire lives bopping around. I don't know. But the reality is, but eventually it did work out. And then we stayed.
But it's pretty amazing and persistent and impressive. You applied once and they lost it.
So John, my partner applied once, and they lost the application in the mail. This is a while ago. But then so one of my times, I'd got to the interview stage, but they lost the line. Another time I interviewed, but they gave the job to somebody else. Mm-hmm. A variety of things. Sure. And we just kept applying, and eventually, there we were.
But so you're sitting in the chair's office.
Yeah.
And you said, I've already moved here. You didn't hire me, but do you have anything for me? Is that how it went?
Right.
And he said, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
And that was the adjunct position.
That was a full-time instructor position.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then tell me so from how many years that got converted to tenure
So
track?
that went on like 2 or 3 years, and then they essentially converted the line to tenure track with a heavier teaching load than typical, which was great. That was great.
And that might be what we would call these days a professor of practice, I suppose.
Yeah, so there are these kind of blurring of lines, and it's interesting to think about, this might be a tangent, but when we think about those teaching stream positions that have more job security, it's really interesting to think about, is it the job security that's the critical issue with those jobs, or is there some other status stuff involved? And at least at Oregon State, the job security is there in these instructor lines, but the status may not be. So you may not be eligible for certain research grants or certain even teaching grants,
right.
and certain like voting on things and different things like that. And so the fact that it was tenure track meant like I was suddenly invited to like the pre-tenure lunches with the colleagues,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a different kind of mentoring. It's a different kind of expectation.
Right.
So I've thought about that a lot. Would I have? I mean, my job would have been quite similar if I had just stayed in the full-time teaching position. I would have pretty good job security, and I'd be able to do my SOTL stuff. Wouldn't be that different of a job, but is different in some ways that matter to some people a lot.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
in the tenure track, you probably had voting rights in faculty meetings.
Right. So, right.
Yeah. So we have at Boise State, we have lecturers who are full-time lecturers who do have voting rights in faculty meetings. But, for example, they cannot fill out an IRB. They cannot be the principal investigator on an IRB application. Now, that's not part of their job description, but many of them want to be active researchers.
That's
So
just that kind of thing.
there are status or inequities or differential expectations in the job descriptions. You're exactly right. So I think it's just a fascinating story, partly of persistence, but also of success, really, that now you lead this program.
Yeah. So now I was in the tenure track thing. Eventually, they changed the teaching percentage so it was more similar to the rest of the faculty. And then I was promoted, and then the chair stepped down, which is a very common story, as you know. You get promoted, the chair steps down, and somehow you find yourself drafted as the only person who's least equipped to like keep yourself out of the job or something. And so
Okay, all right. So time out. All right, all right. I'm not going to let that go. You think you're? No, you're not the least equipped. You think you were you think you were the least protected from saying no?
I don't think I knew as effectively as I do now how to say no to like these kinds of positions, or even understand what the position is or anything like that.
Well, sure. Okay. Yeah. After you've done it, now you know what it is. But that doesn't mean you didn't know what you were stepping into per se. Right?
It's funny because I don't know, like if you've seen like chairs turn over. Our previous chair was like we had asked. Okay, the previous chair had been chair for 10 years, so many people did not know a different chair, and we had moved from department heads to school directors in that time. And so,
is this John?
John Edwards.
Yeah, he was the prior chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we asked John, hey, what does this job actually entail? But the thing is, he was such an expert. He'd been doing it for 10 years that he said, oh, the schedule's due in January. So, I mean, that's about how much any of us really knew about.
That's the one on the whiteboard, right?
Yeah.
In that one room?
Yeah,
the one on the whiteboard.
Yeah. So because of the history and whatnot, we actually didn't have a great idea. he had just become kind of super competent, and
there was no job description. He,
Yeah.
it wasn't articulated anywhere.
yeah, and it had morphed over the years,
Of
obviously,
course,
and
yeah.
so yeah.
So what's the number of years from the time you are hired at Oregon State to today, roughly?
That's 9 years, I think.
Oh my gosh. I thought the number was going to be higher. Kathy,
I know. It's
hello.
fast. Yeah, it was fast.
Congratulations. All right. Nicely
Yeah.
done.
Yeah,
Well played.
I'm tired.
Well, you're tired because, and how many faculty? Full-time, the whole boat?
So yeah, we have about 13 tenure track faculty now.
Okay.
And depending on how you count them, there's
Right.
maybe 10 other instructors.
And then how many undergraduate majors?
So okay, now I have to tell you some news that I don't think I've told you before.
Okay.
So you were out at Oregon State a couple years ago.
I was.
Right around the time that I became director.
I was. And enjoyed, by the way, and full disclosure, enjoyed my visit immensely and incredibly impressed with your school.
And at the time, we had just completed an undergraduate program review that had a number of recommendations that I felt quite challenged to implement as a new chair, but was very interested in implementing. And at that time, we had 800 majors or so.
Okay.
And you told me things to do. Okay, you made suggestions about.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. If I told you things to do, that's fair. We're going to leave that on the record.
Okay. Well,
If that's what I said, that's what I said. I believe you.
Okay, Eric actually would never tell anybody what to do.
Oh, I do, but I soft pedal it. Anna Ropp, who is a dear friend of mine, I usually do this by saying, well, you can do what you want. And then I usually say, here's what I mean is, the next thing I'm about to say is, here's what you should do.
So you did that.
Yeah, I did that.
But you were aided by this external program review.
Yeah.
That had been completed by Missy Beers and Dana Dunn.
Yeah.
And so it was a pretty healthy list of recommendations all the way
Yeah.
around. And those things included things like telling students what classes were coming up, were going to be on the schedule in future terms. And they included things like everyone's going to laugh at it. Like what did you do before? They included things like maybe we could have a club or some other activity for the vast majority of majors who were not in research labs. And
Or in psychi, right?
or in psych.
Yeah.
And maybe you could think about classes that would be beneficial to students who were not graduate school bound, things like that. And so we started doing some of those things.
Of course.
And then last year, about this time, so we're on quarter, so we're only just now getting our census data right about now. So about this time last year, the former chair, John Edwards, who's now an associate dean, comes to me and he says, I don't know what's going on. It makes me really nervous. You're up 100 majors. It's got to be an anomaly. I don't want you budgeting based on this. Who knows what this means? And I said, okay, so I don't know what it means. It's one piece of data. And so we proceed. And then, so then he came back to me a month ago and said, well, you're up another 100 majors. So we are going to have a big party. We're planning a party because we've surpassed 1,000 majors.
Wow.
Yeah. And now John Edwards says, yeah, now I know why. Now I know why the majors are going up. I've accepted it's not a fluke.
But do you have? But I mean, obviously, we never know cause and effect. But do you have a solid sense of why? I mean, just being transparent about future courses is not going to recruit more majors.
So what we had learned was that like a quarter of our majors left after the first year.
Right.
So some of it is, and the reason, and you and I talked about, the reason is if you came in having already taken intro psych, you didn't get any psych classes at all. And in some years, you couldn't even get into psych classes for a couple years.
Sure.
And so instead, you were in classes that were like sort of the least appealing. And so, and have high fail rates across campus. And so part of it was just hanging on to the majors who were already there. And so they were no longer leaving. And again, when they were leaving, they weren't going to another major. They were actually leaving the institution altogether.
Wow.
And so when faculty started to realize that these students, it's not like, well, there was a better major, better fit for them down the road, but they had paid tuition for a year and left. And then some movement began to happen around maybe we should think more about what those students need. So anyway, I think some of it is just hanging on to people who weren't there. Another big piece of it, though, that just really surpassed our expectations is that the fully online students continued to grow too, and they wouldn't have been as subjected to this. So partially it's just continued online interest, but the Corvallis campus growth is going at about the same rate.
Nice.
So it's both.
But also you expanded to the Portland program as well. Is that part of that growth?
Yeah, so we also expanded to Portland, but that is part of the growth. But that has been really challenging. So the Portland program was all about serving transfer students in a different kind of way, in a different place, and so a different population, and serving transfer students. So we solved what we thought was one of the biggest issues, which was getting the transfer articulations, getting those courses. So we solved all that curricularly, and we got the advisors on the ground, at the recruiting events, and we did all the things. And we just discovered there's layers of barriers beyond that. And so Portland is up and running and growing slowly. So that's
but good for you for you had the external reviewers come in, you brought in other people to give you advice, and you followed it that fit your institution. You applied it carefully. And are you pleased with up 200? I mean, that is good news and could be painful news in some ways.
Yeah, so the other key ingredient that's probably key to the whole thing was that we had, around the same time, a new provost and a new budget model. And so under the old provost, old budget model, this would not have been good news. Under the new provost, new budget model, the resources are actually flowing to where the students are.
So the money is following the student for real.
Now for real. And so for real, it's good news.
So your dean is actually really happy that the plus 200 is real and it's not an anomaly.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes. That was a complicated story. There's a lot going on.
Well, but you know what? But Kathy, I appreciate that because it is complicated. The data are messy. And, we have discovered that we don't serve our transfer students well. And we are now trying to disentangle and deconstruct how can we do that. And we're trying to go out to our local, it's College of Western Idaho for us, and how can we help them not only have better articulation agreements, but by the time they get on our campus, after their 2 years, their first semester on our campus, they are juniors. But if they are applying to be in our labs, all those slots are filled.
Right.
And so we're now just this semester talking about we need to go out their spring semester and tell them about how to apply to be in our lab so they could hit the ground running.
Yeah.
And we want their Psi Beta members to hit the ground running and become our Psi Chi members as soon as they want to become that. And so we know at Boise State we have to do a better job. We just can't, hope for the best. Good luck. God bless.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it is a complicated story, and that budget model, what we call it, is Bronco Budget 2.0.
You call it Bronco.
Yeah. So yours isn't like Beaver Budget 3.0.
It's not Beaver Budget, although that would be really funny, but it's not.
No, I'm serious. Ours is called Bronco Budget 2.0, where the
what
dollars.
was Bronco Budget 1.0?
The old way of doing it, but it was never called Bronco Budget 1.0, to my knowledge.
This makes it sound much more planful and systematic, I guess.
Yeah, right, 2.0. There's going to be a 2.1 upgrade at some point. This is what we do in higher ed, right? We slap labels on things. So I wanted to put a pin back in that spousal accommodation. I'm not so sure. Maybe Oregon State has figured it out, but Boise State has a policy, and you can't see this in the podcast. I'm using air quotes as I'm doing spousal accommodation. We like to think that we honor that at Boise State, but we really don't. Do you guys?
It's a similar situation. So there's a policy and there's theoretically some central funding to support it. But when it comes down to making those arrangements, one has to do a little digging to find out if the money's there and did they really, what's the real story? So I agree with the air quotes around the policy is definitely there.
Yeah, so we just hired last year. We've got another search going on this year, and the person we hired has a spouse in higher ed. And what we try to do on our campus is obviously try to make that connection, but the policy is odd, and it's some combination of, well, if there's a position available, the provost office and the dean will do a half-time funding for up to 3 years.
Yeah.
But then it's sink or swim, but the deans don't ever have an appropriated line of money for it, so it's stitched together somehow, some way.
That's quite similar to what we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's hit or miss. And, I think about, well, what if someone in engineering came to Boise State and they had a trailing spouse who was a PhD or PsyD psychologist and wanted a job in our department?
Yeah, that exact scenario happened to me.
And what'd you do?
I met with the psychologist who was amazing, actually. And started these, talked to the other school director who was talking to me because now we have to start interpreting the policy. And we had we started investigating the air quotes around the policy. And where we got a little bit hung up was on the differences in hiring actually between the College of Engineering and the College of Liberal Arts. So in engineering, it's very difficult to get faculty members. There's really tight timelines and pretty hardball negotiating. And so it didn't work out. The person ended up going somewhere else, but there was a lot I learned about, even within an institution, different norms and different ways of thinking about all of this. And all of that just took time and confused the decision-making process, very confusing about who the decision makers were in this whole scenario.
Yeah.
Like there's 2 deans, there's 2 school directors, the implementation of it didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, do you have an extra faculty office? Maybe you do on the second floor of Reed Lodge,
It's very crowded up there.
Is it really?
Yeah, we do have an office space shortage.
Right. On the Zimbardo wing, you actually have...
No, we do not.
You don't have any
We
extra?
would have to do something creative to find a place for the person. Even then we had the student demand where we probably could have hired. But
yeah, but you don't have extra startup money hanging around for somebody. I mean, I doubt if your budget, we always keep an extra coffer available.
Right.
Budgets don't normally work that way.
Yeah, let's just say that again for the audience. People do not have special coffers of money hidden under the desk.
But interestingly, let's also say this. It's interesting on college campuses when a dean or a provost has a bright, shiny new idea, money tends to appear.
From somewhere, yes.
I don't know if maybe that doesn't happen in Oregon. It does tend to happen in Idaho. I won't speak for you and get you in trouble.
No, I agree. That is also true.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit, and if you don't mind telling your origin story, and this is normally how it starts. When you were growing up, was the discussion if you will go to college or not, or was it always which college you will go to? Maybe if you would mind talking a little bit about, did your parents go to college? Did you have siblings? Whatever amount of detail you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I lived in rural Kansas until I was 12. And most people in that town didn't go to college. My mom didn't go to college. My extended family on my dad's side are a very conservative type of Mennonite who are actually religiously opposed to higher education. And so on that wing of the family, it's not like, would you go, or it's actually considered ungodly. It's considered worldly, which is not good.
Really?
So-
I've honestly never heard of that.
Yes. So, well, the idea is, don't you trust God? What do you need to get so smart about? Why do you need to understand, the heavens or whatever?
Okay. Okay.
And so a large part of my family, they run their own schools and they go to about 8th grade, and then they become an apprentice or what have you. So, but both my dad and my aunt, though, did leave the church and put themselves through college. So, and I think that's really interesting and can't be like completely random.
Right.
And so on that level, I think my dad and aunt probably always expected or hoped I would go to college, but it definitely, there were not discussions of college visits or anything like that. But then we moved to Oregon when I was 12, and that was kind of a shift, so away from this extended family. But I can tell you, when I got into college my freshman year and I called back to my grandparents.
And what college was that?
My first place I went was Seattle University.
Oh, sure.
And I went in my dorm and I was calling my grandparents. And the first thing they said was, as I said, I'm in my dorm. It's on the 7th floor. Well, where I'm from, there are no, I might as well be Manhattan. And so they said to me, well, you must think you're so smart. It was very negative. So we didn't talk about college after that. So that was kind of in the background. And also going to college kind of meant leaving your whole entire family in church. And it was actually a pretty, it's a pretty serious decision. It's like excommunication. You're actually removed from the family. Yeah. So I got a pass because I was a grandkid, and so I guess they liked me, but no, it's a pretty serious deal, and so yeah. But then by the time I was in high school and I started getting grades and stuff like that, I think it became more clear to my parents that I'd probably go.
And plus, your dad had kind of cleared the way by going to college,
right?
When the granddaughter then goes, There may have been some disappointment, but I guess maybe this may not be the nicest way to say it, but if the dad did the first disappointment of going to college by breaking tradition in that religious sect, so the granddaughter going couldn't have been that big a surprise.
That's right.
So
right.
Were you the only child?
Nope, I have a brother.
Okay, older or younger?
He's 18 months younger.
18 months younger. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said you started at Seattle University.
Yeah, so this came up on Twitter just recently, and so you might have seen it. But I was there for exactly one term, and during that term, there was someone who died and was in a manhole.
Yes, I saw you post that.
So right 20 feet in front of the front door of this residence hall was a manhole cover, and then a body had been put in there and been sealed up. And so I remember getting ready to go home for Thanksgiving, and we're up on the 7th floor, and we were watching as they were discovering this body and everything. And the story that we had heard from the institution, it may have evolved over time, but the story we were originally told was that someone fell in. And this was part of my decision not to return to Seattle University. It wasn't a good fit. So,
well, how do you fall in and then get lodged right underneath the manhole cover?
Pull the cover in, exactly, right? And so, and that was enough. I mean, at the time, there were other kind of contextual factors, but that certainly wasn't appealing.
What was the pull? What was the pull from Kansas to Seattle? Oh, you'd already moved there. You'd already moved to Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
so
right.
When you went to Seattle, did you have a declared major?
I think I was vaguely pre-med, like a quarter of college students are.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go home for Thanksgiving, and then do you know where you're going to go right away? Do you stop out for a while? Do you take a gap?
So I ended up pretty quickly. There was a little bit of transition, but I ended up pretty quickly finding a job as a nanny for 5 boys, and I liked that job because it gave me a place to live, and I went to community college at night. And I took, at the time, there were classes for the early career people. At the time, there were classes beamed over the cable TV at night. And you got a VHS tape and you stuck it in and you recorded it and you watched the tapes. And then you went down to the community college and took a test on it or wrote a paper or whatever. And I took intro psych in person at night from 6 to 9 p.m. And then I transferred and, yeah.
And where you transferred to University of Oregon?
Yeah.
Okay, for your last 2 years?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, as a psychology major.
I started off undecided if I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a social major or a psychology major. And I had a bad experience with a sociology instructor. And so being 20 or whatever, I just changed to psychology because I liked them more.
Do you think I could be wildly wrong. It won't be the first time. Was it the nannying for 5 boys? Is that a spark of developmental interest, or is it even before that?
Yeah, no, I remember interviewing for that job, and they said, "Why would you want this job?" And again, like I might not have mentioned the 2 youngest were twins, and they were 2 months old. I mean, it was quite a job, right? So like, why would you actually want this job? And I remember saying on the interview, because I really enjoy watching kids develop. So clearly that was already there.
But you already went so you were interested in development before you became a nanny.
Yeah, yes. That was true.
So where did that come from?
I don't know, but in Kansas, again, with this whole extended family I just described,
Sure.
a very common pathway, thing to do, experience would be, so these families are quite large, obviously. And so it was girls were definitely socialized had to raise the younger children. And so while that wasn't my family's experience directly, but my extended family certainly spent a lot of time with kids.
And so you go to University of Oregon at Eugene. Delightful campus. My daughter went there, so she graduated a few years back.
In journalism, right?
And oh, wow, good for you. Journalism and advertising, double major, and had a great experience there. So I drove over that part of the state, so I've been there many times.
Yeah.
Okay. And then bachelor's degree in psychology?
Yes, I got a BS in psychology. I got into a lab. I was lucky, like you were just describing. I was lucky to get a lab after I transferred.
Okay, all right. So I don't know if you listen to the podcast, and it's okay if you don't.
I do.
Do you?
Yeah.
So how did that luck happen? So a lab just called you up one day and said, "Hey, Kathy, would you come and take credits and volunteer?"
Oh, you know how it happened?
Yeah.
There was a study that was running a really cool study where they were running play groups with 4-year-olds, and they needed preschool teachers. They needed teachers in the classroom, and they were coding the kids' aggression. And I applied, and because I had taken care of all these kids my whole life, I could definitely do that much of it.
Oh, so you applied.
So I definitely did apply.
Oh.
There definitely was a bulletin board in a stairwell.
Oh, so you noticed it, you applied, and then you got it, and then you probably worked very hard.
Well, in
so
reality,
I'm sorry,
yes.
Where was the luck in that? What do you mean you were lucky?
Well, okay, I was lucky that the playgroups started at that particular moment. Otherwise, I would have gotten into.
Fortunate.
I was fortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, and I'm sorry. I do this way too much. It's
actually an important point because people say this all the time, and it bugs me about other people because I can see in other people that actually they weren't that lucky. Or it actually bothers me when people think that there was luck involved when there wasn't. And so because it doesn't tell you what you need to do to be successful.
That's the piece that bothers me because if someone overhears that there was a great bit of luck that led to your success, then other early career faculty might go, I have to wait for luck to strike. When I knew when you what you said, you didn't really mean luck.
Right.
Which is
It's
why I
true.
gently pressed you to tell what really happened.
I would agree with you.
Yeah. I even tried to do this with Bill McKeechee, visiting him in 2018, very gently. And he was renowned through his career. I was just lucky.
Yeah.
When Jane Hallen interviewed him, he said the same. In fact, that's one of the titles of one of the chapters that she wrote about him. I was just lucky.
Just lucky.
When I got a chance to write about him, my title was More Than Just Luck.
It is. I think there is an interaction. So the other side of that is there are people who work really hard and in higher education, and things don't work out for them. And
Yes, I think there are moments of coincidence. I think there are moments of timing where timing aligns well. But people work really hard and then get noticed because of good timing. Yes, there is an interaction. There's a synergism
yeah.
that happens sometimes. And you're right, sometimes there's the lack of timing.
Well, and the other thing is that you could say, well, I completed this predoctoral fellowship and then I completed this postdoctoral fellowship. So that's like a huge amount of investment from the National Institutes of Health, right? And then I go and take this half-time teaching job. And you could say, well, but that's not what you were trained for, and that wasn't a good decision, and that was like unlucky, or it could be any number of things. And so that's also true. If I had viewed that as just not lucky and just given up, then that wouldn't have gone anywhere.
But the thing is, though, think about how you got that job at Oregon State.
Right.
There's no luck to that at all. You
Right.
were persistent as all get out, and look how it has paid off for you.
Yeah.
That's if I had control over the headline, that's the part of the story I want to promote and celebrate.
No, I think it is true. I think a lot of the landscape is very different for early career people today, no doubt. Certainly, there are fewer tenure track jobs, and the amount of paperwork and things that are required on those applications has gone up, and the number of publications we expect has gone up. So it's very, very different. But sometimes I think early career people underestimate a little bit the amount of persistence and hard work and precarity that some of us actually went through early on too. It's not like when we were hanging out there in New Hampshire and I'm in a post. It's not like we had this all mapped out at all.
Right. Oh, I completely agree with you.
And certainly did not have a house and didn't, was still driving my parents' car. I mean,
Right.
I think sometimes some of that gets lost. And it's not to take away from the current moment that early, the challenges that early career people have today, but it really wasn't like we just, kind of cruised around.
No,
and
there were lots of struggles.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, undergraduate, Oregon, psych major, bachelor's degree, you go to grad school, where?
So, I'm gonna omit the word lucky in telling the next part.
Thank you.
So I get in the research lab. Things are going well. I become a paid research assistant. I start interacting more with the PI from that lab. I start talking to that PI and say, I'd really like to stay here at U of O, and I'd like to work with you in graduate school. And she was supportive of that. And as a backup, there was another person I had a class with, just one class. It was just a class with 75 people in it. And I said, I'm also really interested in your work. I'm thinking of applying to graduate school here. I'm probably going to work primarily with this other person. Can I put you on the application as another person? She said, yes, that would be interesting. Let's talk about that. My primary advisor, in between the time I applied and the time I was admitted, was diagnosed with breast cancer and died.
Oh my gosh.
And so now here I am, having submitted an application to work on this one project with this one PI.
Wow.
And by this time I had met my partner and he was enrolled in graduate school. And so I go to...
At U of O?
At U of O.
Okay.
So I go to the chair of the admissions committee and just explain the situation. And fortunately, at U of O, there's a culture of a lot of dual hires, and so I wasn't laughed out of the room or ridiculed or told to go somewhere else anyway. And so they said, well, that makes perfect sense. Actually, that's what they said. Makes perfect sense. You could still come here and work with the secondary person. And so I said, okay. And so time went on, and I always like to tell people I was admitted on April 15th at 2 p.m., which means that I was not their first, second, or third choice. But it doesn't really matter. No one knows that, and nobody cares on April 16th who was admitted when or anything else. So eventually I was admitted, came in and worked with the secondary person, and then so got my master's en route, and then got the PhD there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got all three at U of O.
Yeah.
So tell me your sense of this, because I get asked this by students sometimes, and I don't know of any national data. So you're living evidence. Is there a disadvantage of getting all 3 degrees at one institution?
So sure, in the sense that you potentially are not exposed to different models. So potentially all 8 years of that experience was in one particular model. Fortunately, it's mostly a good experience, but
right.
But yeah, that program was, for example, very interdisciplinary. That's very different from other programs where you have a clinical program and you got your experimental program, and they're like totally separate. I never have like experienced that myself, and I find it really weird. And so when it comes to interacting with other departments and things like that, so that's true. And students ask me all the time. I try not to tell them this whole story actually, because many people, that's what they want to do, and I think it's quite unlikely, and there's a lot of reasons why that we don't like to do it very much. At Oregon State, we've accepted in quite a few of our graduate students, and I think one of the things I've come to learn about that is that to increase diversity, we need to think about this more, because we need to think about what it means to ask people to leave their home,
right,
to go somewhere else for school, and that's normative in some families, but really quite an unreasonable sacrifice in other cases. And so we have I have my own experience, and then I have the experience of our graduate students now. And I can tell you from the Oregon OSU experience, they just make the transition beautifully. Like between that summer of their senior year when they come in, they grow up, and then it's a different role, and they're doing different things with different people and learning different skills,
right.
and they're like different people. Really, that's what we found.
Yeah, and I just don't know. I get asked this, and I think with a couple of colleagues, I've written about it for Psychi, the Eye on Psychi magazine.
Yeah.
And you just give your best advice, but again, I don't know of any national data. I think there's a stereotype that sometimes it's not good, but if it works out, it works out. And I don't know of any data that says don't do it. So anyway, that's why when I heard that from you, I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. I guess I don't have anything to add to that. Yeah.
When it works out, it works out.
Yeah.
So I've almost taken a complete hour of your time, but
Yes.
there's a couple more things I want to ask you
Yeah.
about.
I'll be succinct.
No. I'm sorry. I didn't say that for that reason. I'm saying that for me to be respectful,
Okay.
not for you to shorten any answers. We have toyed with the idea together about teaching boot camps.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, so I still like that idea of an opportunity for teachers to come together, maybe for 4 or 5 days in the summer, and train on maybe a course design for a day, and assessment techniques for a day, or how you could use improv in the classroom for a day. I don't know of anybody doing that in psychology in the nation for like grad students or early career or postdocs. Do you know of anybody doing that in the nation on a regular basis?
No.
So when are we going to start that?
So I guess I could say I have a real vision for it after this last summer. Because
You do.
As
That's awesome.
We at Oregon State hosted the West Coast version of APA's high school teachers workshop, which meant we did host 25 teachers. High school
The Clark,
teachers.
right?
The Clark, yes, the Clark West Coast or whatever we're going to call it. And we did it. That was kind of like that. I mean, it was the experience of having a group of people. And
How many days was it? I can't
it was
remember.
2.5 days.
Okay.
And we had, but you're together and there's dinner and we
Right.
toured
There's
labs
a cohort that bonds.
Yeah. And that was it was super fun to get to know everybody. And it was different. And when we got the evaluations back from the high school teachers, that's what they said too. Like it was immersive. They said it was immersive. They said this was a professional development activity where high school teachers were respected, which I don't know if that had anything to do with the boot camp thing, but I suspect it kind of did because you were kind of together for that period of time. And so I can now have like a concrete vision. I mean, literally down to like, where would you sleep and what would you eat and like, how would you what would you do?
The logistics.
Yeah. And it was super energizing and both those of us putting it on and the high school teachers said it was really different from the other ways in which you get professional development. So,
all right. So, all right, let's do this. So, how did you become so supportive of these innovative ideas? Because I have an insider. I have insider information about what goes on at Oregon State.
this is one of the weirder things about my job. Yes.
I have a plant. I have an insider. Actually, I have more than one.
Exactly.
There's actually a tape recorder and video recording on that microwave.
That you planted.
As well as I have human reporters. People bring ideas to you, and you say yes. The idea to do Clark moved from Green Bay to Corvallis.
Well, what people say about me in this job of the chair thing is that that I spend a lot of time thinking about how all of these things fit together. So I do spend a lot of time thinking about how all of these things fit together. And so when we talked about like this budget model that we talked about, it's not, Bronco 2.0. I spend hours and hours and hours going over through. I just really enjoy it. I enjoy the spreadsheets and everything else. and it. So I mention this because people just assume like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do this? It's like, no, actually, like that makes financial sense. This would help achieve this other objective over here. Yeah, this is this other thing over here, but this would allow us to do this other thing over here at the same time. I spend a lot of time in my head with these dials and connections between things, and so when people bring these ideas, if I can figure out a way for it to work with all of what I know is going on in my head, then we do it. So it's not altruistic. Let me put it that way. It's not like, oh, gee, we'll do it.
Wait, it's not altruistic.
Well, it's not. It's
so
not
you ran
like, it's not like favors. There are chairs like that.
You ran the Clark West thing to make money only.
Well,
that's what you're saying.
We definitely did not make any money off the Clark West thing, but okay, so that in particular is really related to the fact that we know that high school graduations are declining across the country, but in particular in the part of Oregon and the Northwest where you and I draw students from. We know that more students are taking intro psych at the high schools through AP or through credit for college credit. So we know we have to build connections with the high schools at some point to remain, viable and relevant to people.
Yeah, but the thing is, here's the thing, Kathy. You're actually doing something about it. You and your colleagues are doing something about it. We can all say we know it, but you're actually doing something about it, which is awesome and cool.
Oh, that's your question? Why do I do stuff about it?
That's a statement. So let me ask you this. What was the last... And you might actually not want to answer this. What was the last really cool idea that someone brought to you that you had to say no to?
Sometimes it's just not the right time for something. Okay. And so on the teaching thing in particular, like, you can't get out ahead of where people are. I'm not answering the question.
That's okay. I mean,
well, the boot camp thing, the teaching boot camp thing would be a good thing.
Yeah.
That's why I'm haven't said we're doing it this summer, because I want to make sure that it's the right time and that and haven't quite figured it out yet.
Yeah, we should talk off the air about that. I have some ideas about that.
But, another thing that I think is true, and I've heard one other chair say this about kind of different context, but I say this a lot at work, is that because of the work, going back to the work and the child trauma stuff and the crimes against kids, and I've been a foster parent and things like that, nothing at all at work involves, a kid's life being at stake. So for me, like, it's low risk. Like, trying things is just never, it's just never, it's all like, I wouldn't say it's play, but it's like, let's see what we can do here. Like, this could be really, like, to me, it's like, there's so many opportunities as compared to trying to think about the problem of, like, abused 4-year-olds growing up. I mean, there's an intractable problem that I'm not sure I can, but this seems like quite tractable. Like, we could spend a small amount of money and see how it works and move on. And I don't think I get maybe as hung up as some other people about, I don't know,
who gets credit on their CV and where it happens.
I think about that all the time when in my head around, I'm like, well, no kids, is any kid's life at stake right now? No. Then let's try it. Then let's try,
I think that's an amazingly healthy framing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
Kathy, thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you.